So one of the biggest issues I have with all of these just terrible housing takes is just obviously just the lack of effort that a lot of these folks put in terms of their analysis. It's usually just some like Whoopi Goldberg type of just mouth drooling idiocy where it's, well, I'm just going to base my opinion or position on a hunch that is not grounded in any data whatsoever. And I'm just going to go with it, and I'm going to have a lot of conviction in my position. And hey, you know what? That's all that really matters. Well, that person and people like that are just dumb. There are estimates for all of these things, and you can look at it over time, oftentimes at a very granular level, and you can make sense of it. And you can really add some color around, well, why are there so many conflicting narratives out there? What is actually going on in terms of housing affordability, and why is this an issue? Well, the issue is it's apparent, just plain as day, that this is definitely and has always been an issue on the renter side of households, which make up 1/3 of all households. Roughly 45 million rent or households are renters. Um, but it's really only apparent from a home ownership side if you're a new home buyer, right? Because of all the appreciation that we've had in home prices, and that is going to flow through to things like DTIs. So, all right, let me explain this setup because I know that there's a lot of information here, but it's all set up this way so you can digest a lot of information in basically just one visual. So the top chart is the entire housing stock for Davidson County 2010 to 2022. And everything you're going to see here is the ACS 5-year annual estimates. They're not available for 2023 yet. They come out, I want to say, in December of this year. But I have the 1-year estimates as well trended. And they're just going to look a little choppier than this. That's just part of the methodology around those estimates. They're not available for 2020. So, and the other thing I would add too is they have less geographic coverage. So I prefer to look at the ACS 5-year annual estimates because they are more accurate. Okay, all that being said, back to this visual. The entire housing stock is up top. Owner occupied with and without mortgage in blue, renters in red, vacant housing units in yellow. So the color scheme up top is going to match up with those two charts at the bottom. The darker the respective color saturation indicates more of those households in those respective buckets are paying more of their income towards some form of shelter cost. So again, renters not really getting a break. And you can see that it's actually increased in some of those higher, rents to incomes buckets near term. That should not really come as a surprise. We've seen what rents have done. Incomes have not kept up, obviously. But if you look at it from a home ownership side, while we're seeing a growing number of households with mortgages, there are also a growing number of households that don't have mortgages because not every household experiences housing costs the same way. That would be like assuming that everybody bought the same house for the same price and the same financing terms at the same time. We know that that doesn't work that way. So it is important to look at this distribution over time and just see what that is telling us. So the other thing I would just note out too is like as you're seeing the blue shading for homeowners move like up and to the right, that should also indicate to you that not everybody in a market like Davidson County, and that's the heart of the MSA. Just think Nashville when I say that. It's the most populous of the 14 counties. Not everybody buys with cash around here, despite it's all these cash buyers from California. No, you can't just say that in the aggregate. That's just wrong. Okay, so And that's also not uncommon to see in a market where the population in the aggregate is younger. I mean, think about that logically. They have, generally speaking, uh, lower incomes than older folks. Uh, they've had less time to accumulate wealth. And so that's why you would see a trend like this in younger markets. So let's just look at this another way. So the charts at the bottom, I'm just going to highlight those households paying 30% more of their income towards rent. And these are share charts now. So basically, renters were starting to get some relief, we'll call it, around right before COVID, and then it just went in the wrong direction. So now over 50% of households on the renter side are paying 30% plus of the, or yeah, 30% plus of their income towards rent, which is considered to be a cost burden household. You pay more than that, there's research around that's going to put a household in financial distress. It's really high even for the 50% plus crowd. So I'm going to highlight just on the mortgage homes, that same thing. It's a little harder to see that because we're including homes without a mortgage. But in general, it's been going in the wrong direction since 2020. So I'm going to just jump over here and show it year over year to make that trend a little easier to see. Do the same thing. And what you're going to observe is a much more obvious trend that while there are a growing number of homes that don't have mortgages, those that do have mortgages, they are quite cost burdened, right? So it's really just kind of unfortunate when people like talk about these things as if they have a clue what they're talking about. And by the way, this information is for every county in the country. Uh, I'm not going to look at it unless I can look at these things at scale. So let me make a couple of observations. As I said earlier, Davidson County, really the heart of the MSA, is much younger. That flows through to all of these household metrics, but it's not enough to just say, okay, well, you can compare Davidson County to just younger populations and it's all going to kind of line up and you're going to see this story play out like identically in some of these other areas. Well, the answer is no, that's just unrealistic. And it just, like with everything in life, there's nuance. So it's really the extent to which these household dynamics are at the extreme end in a place like Nashville, even in a place like Austin, Texas, and Denver. And what I mean by that is if your population is relatively younger and there is a higher than average concentration of young households, like under the age of 35, and smaller households, both on the renter and owner occupied side, that theoretically means that there are fewer earners per household. Which, if you think about that within the context of a softening labor market and where there could be stress, I feel like that should be obvious. So that that household or those smaller households are more dependent on one earner. And if their population is younger, if these households are younger as an extension, then we also know that younger populations have a higher labor force participation rate. And so, yes, those local labor market trends are going to capture what is actually happening in these markets. Let's not pretend like that's not the case. So, in addition to that, and I've said this before, and comparing Nashville, really city center, to a place like Austin and Denver, is you also have a problem with either in Denver and in Austin, and really I'm talking Travis County, Denver County, you have negative net migration in 2023 in those markets. Nashville, it's very net migration has slowed significantly. You also have overbuilding in both of these markets. It's not just on the family side; it's also on the single family side as well. So yes, it's biased to multifamily, but it's very elevated historically also on the single family side. So that is a long-winded way of saying all of these young people, despite maybe like making poor financial choices in terms of not budgeting and spending on things that they likely can't afford, but ironically, they have access to tons of credit. You just set that aside for a minute. They are ridiculously cost burdened. I'm not showing the cuts of, say, like the number of one person households and how that distribution looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 plus person households or households by age. I have that information. I've looked at it. It is well outside what it looks like at a national level in a place like Nashville, in a place like Travis County, in a place like Denver. That's a problem. So, look, yes, it only makes sense that we would start to see pressures as we've seen at a national level when you look at like credit card delinquencies and auto loan delinquencies by different cohorts such as age groups. It is definitely biased to younger people. We also know the unemployment rate is higher for younger people. So you do have a point. It is a problem for younger people, and thank God that these aren't my circumstances. But yeah, you are getting screwed. Don't listen to some asshat boomer who's just seeing what he wants to see and makes no attempt to look into anything because they're just a dumbass and they don't care. So I just showed you the numbers. Take this for what you will. You make your own decision as to whether or not this is real, but we can look at any market and you're going to observe this same general pattern all over the place. It's really the extent to which these sorts of dynamics are playing out. In addition to all of those other factors, and even things like obviously investor activity in these markets, which is very elevated historically, where it would only make sense to see things like this start to really materialize. Yeah, households are getting run over, and it's going to be biased typically to markets where the households are typically younger and more concentrated. So, all right, guys, let me know if there's some other markets you'd like to look at.